We gave him 15 minutes or so, so let's get rolling. Welcome to both of you who came back from the pizza. Thank you guys so much for just clap. Pizza. I'm here to top saddest talk. Right. You're already crying. You're like, shit. I didn't mean to walk back in here. I'm sorry. So, Meteor, extract some of the data from Meteor. You know, the obligatory slide. My name is Tim Medin. I work for a company called CounterHack. I teach with Sands. I've spoken at a bunch of stuff. You know, the obligatory slide. I tried to have a slide here, but like nobody gives a crap on this slide, but whatever. Obligatory slide. So what is Meteor? First off, does anybody know what Meteor is? Any of you guys familiar with it? All right, both of you. This is going to be a fantastic time. Oh yeah, so the third guy, fourth guy, I can't count, whatever, it doesn't matter. So what for the rest of you who don't know what Meteor is, it's an open source framework for web development. It's an open source web framework. It uses Node.js on the back end. And then it's got this really fancy term called, it's a real-time framework. So if you update something on the back end, it gets automatically sent to the client on the front end. And if one user makes an update, it automatically gets pushed to another user. And all sorts of weird dark magic happens on the back end. Now, for those of you who are like, well, why do I care? Well, the nerds on GitHub said this is the #1 framework. So this is why it's important. Sort of, right? We're probably going to see a lot more development in this in the years coming. Because it is relatively easy to develop, it gives us that real-time capability where I can push updates. And frankly, it's kind of a nice framework. Now, they have made some changes in the more recent versions of the framework that have made it like a miserable experience, but that's a whole separate discussion. I was searching around for some information on Meteor. One of my favorite quotes is this: it's optimized for developers' happiness. How many developers do you guys know that are remotely happy? Right? Like you, sir, you're wearing a Minnesota Vikings jersey. You are not a happy person. No football fans in here? You guys even know what football is? You should get out more. All right, whatever. No, it does not come with free whiskey. So one of the nice things with developing these frameworks, this framework, is I can use JavaScript everywhere. Now, some of you are going to be like, oh, well, JavaScript's the worst. Yeah, it kind of is, but at least it's the same crap everywhere. Otherwise, what you have to do, you have like PHP on the back end, and it's using that to dynamically generate HTML and maybe dynamically generate JavaScript, and then you're trying to pass messages back and forth, and that's why we have a suicide rate, right? It's awful. I'm full of inappropriate jokes here. But it also gives us client-side rendering, which is going to make things a lot easier for us. We don't have to do all the weird funkiness on the back end and send it to the client. We just push the template down, push the data down, and the client takes care of all of it. And we don't have to do this weird matching of the data sent down from the server to the client and translating different languages and parsing and all sorts of weird stuff. It takes care of all of that for us. On the back end, we're going to use Mongo. Now, Mongo, we use a NoSQL format. Can any of you write a reasonable number of queries in Mongo? You're lying. The rest, right? Okay. This framework is inherently secure because no one knows how to write a freaking query in NoSQL. It's like DB, select star from users. That's all the users. Right? In Mongo, it's like db.users.find.fetch, and you get the information. If you want these weird complex queries, it gets really weird. And unions turn into this weird pipeline thing that's like turns into this weird South Dakota mess. It's a disaster. So how these messages get passed back and forth. So I do some sort of update, or I manipulate some of the database information, and it's going to get pushed back and forth. We use that with DDP. This is not the DDP you're going to find in Urban Dictionary, so this is completely different. Yeah, it is. What's going to happen right about now is someone's going to be like, yeah, and they're going to look at it and be like, wow, I'm going to see the look in your eyes when you do it here in just a minute. You're doing it right now? Yeah. Actually, I have no idea what it means, but whatever. Okay. So we're going to pass the messages back and forth so I can get my update. It's going to then push the update to the client. The client's going to render the data. I can then send smaller chunks of updates back to the server and be like, hey, this is the one field. Let's update this guy. The server's going to update and push it to the other clients. So it's sort of a fancy way of doing some of our data manipulation and passing messages back and forth, like an RPC type call. So it looks a little bit like this. So if I want to, here I'm going to be calling a method. So I'm on my client. I want to call something that's run on the server code. Maybe it's potentially sensitive. I want to do some additional validation, whatever. So I've got my method here called transfer money. And I've got a couple of parameters. I've got my account numbers, how much I want to transfer. I'm going to send it to the server. The server's going to do its little funky magic. And then in this case, it's going to send me a result back and say, oh, you transferred 1,000. Now you've got 5,000 in your account. And then the client is then going to update and render this. There is no rendering on the server side. Okay? So the data is pushed back and forth with a publication and a subscription. So I'm going to publish a set of data on the server. The client is going to subscribe to that publication, and then it's going to render within the client. Now, what we'll oftentimes see, or what I've seen in these applications, my own applications included, is sometimes it's just easier to push a whole bunch of data and let the client filter it. Which means sometimes too much data gets pushed and we can have a leak. Because it makes it a lot easier on the server side. It's like, yeah, we'll just push all of the user information. And maybe inside there is like a password hash or some other secret token that you're not supposed to push. Or you push all of the settings information and sometimes the sensitive stuff is in there. It's not rendered, but it still is sent to the client and we can extract some of that information. On top of that, we can have additional parameters. So I can say, hey, server, I want all the information for this particular user. Now, it might be just my user, but if I can say, well, if I get your user ID, I say, hey, server, can I get, his information and his information and his information? I can start grabbing all of that information. It might not show up on my web page, but I can start extracting it from within my browser. Okay? So some of the cool things about Meteor is it prevents some of these things. Now you can, of course, work really hard to bypass some of these protections. By default, it's going to take any sort of script tags and it's going to render them nicely. So it's going to take your greater than, your less than, convert it into ampersand LT semicolon, ampersand GT semicolon, to try to protect you. Now, you can screw that up. Right? No framework is going to be perfect. If you use that information wrong, if you render it wrong, if you pass it improperly, it will try to protect you. But yes, you can screw it up. Mongo, you're not going to see your traditional SQL injection techniques, but we still have some NoSQL injection techniques. By the way, has anyone ever tried to use NoSQL map? Good. You saved yourself a lot of whiskey and swears. It's an absolute miserable. It sounds really cool. Yes, have you guys used SQL Map before for traditional SQL exploitation? Yeah, that's a great tool. NoSQL Map, unfortunately, is not that great. So the subscriptions and publications. Here's an example, a very simple subscription and publication. So my publication is going to be, this is the data that the server is going to publish to a client. So my publication here says accounts.find, and I'm going to give it an ID. Now, when the client requests that publication, it's going to include, for example, this example here, the ID of the user. So I'm going to say, oh, by the way, hey, server, can I get information for whatever user ID this is? Now, in the real world, this application is probably just going to get information for my account. There's actually an injection point here. If I change my ID to valid JSON and change it to where ID is greater than 0 or space, I'm actually going to get all of the accounts back. And I can use that to start extracting and mining information on other users in my environment, right? So what can we get? So we can, exactly what we did a second ago, we can grab too much data. But we'll also see sometimes is too much data is sent, just because, frankly, it's easier. I'm just going to get all of the records from this table. How many times has a developer done stuff like that? Just for testing, just for development, I'm going to push all these records, and then we'll clean it up later. And when does later happen? Never, right? Which means this data is always sent down, and it's hard to detect because it's not rendered in the client. And sometimes developers think things are magically safe. There's a lot of things developers think are magic. It's not shown in the page, so we're totally okay. Definitely not going to be the case. So same with the quantity of records. Maybe we don't display all of them in the client, but it's still sent to the client, and we can access some of that data. And we can do this through like the JavaScript console. Now things have changed a little bit with the more recent versions of Meteor. They've recently updated to 1.4. 1.4 changes things a little bit, but prior to 1.4, all your variables, like all your Mongo tables and such, collections rather, are loaded into the global namespace on the client, which makes it a lot easier for me to extract this data and start peeking around inside. With 1.4 and later, they want you loaded in special modules. It's a little bit more difficult to do, but I'm going to show you the stuff from 1.3 and earlier. Why? Because most of the people aren't going to completely rewrite their application from scratch when they upgrade to the more recent version of Meteor, right? That might be a slow, kind of a long-term type of thing, right? So I'm going to show you some stuff here. So like we've got, for example, some of the collection names. Now, one of the nice things is in the client, we're going to load it with mini Mongo, and I can query it just like I do a real back-end Mongo database. I can extract these these collection names using this. So I've got, so here's Net Wars. Any of you guys played Net Wars before? Sans event? So we got Sans Net Wars. It's a thing we do at the tournaments. I wrote this thing in Meteor. What I'm going to do, by the way, I'll give you guys the slides later, save you guys the trouble of taking pictures of. So I'm going to paste down here in the JavaScript console. Let me clear this. I'm going to paste this little weird command. Meteor.connection.mongo live data collections. So here's all the local collections that are sent to my system. So I've got a users collection, I've got a roles collection, I've got this reactive table one you can ignore, blueprint information, this is stuff about the actual game and such. I can then start extracting information from those collections. However, if I start typing, we see users here, there is no users object. What we need is we need a nice name for the collection. So if we come back here, I can run this handy little script. So let me just grab this real quick. I'll show you another easier way in just a minute. Come back here, paste this in. Illegal return statement. Oh, that was awesome. Calls is not defined. Lies. Oh, whatever, screw it. I got an easier way in just a second. Once we get the collection names, I don't know why that didn't work, because I've done this demo like 10 times before. Weird. What's that? Shouldn't matter. Doesn't matter. There it is. I did that a second ago. Why didn't it? Oh, whatever. Anyway, so here's my various collections. So if I come in here, I can see the name is Blueprint. Still not giving me that. Whatever. I'll show you a cooler way in just a second. What I can do is once I have the proper collection name, is I can do collection name find fetch. So for example, if I click through that enough, I'll find that the user account information is stored in meteor.users. And I can say .find fetch. And there's all of the user information I have back to my system in all of the nice data structure. So for example, here's information on test one, that's my account. There's information on instructor. Okay, so this is an admin account. I'm logged in as just a regular user, but I've got the ID for one of the admins. And I've got this is my admin account. So there's the ID and an admin account. So I'm learning information about some of the users in this thing. Other users as well. Some of the other collections, so we had like So here's some other information about it. I can get my settings. And I can start to extract some of this data. I can also try to update some of this data. Ideally, the server protects and says, oh, you don't have permissions to manipulate this data. But sometimes developers will sort of forget about that piece, like, oh yeah, they're not going to see this anyway. How would they know to update it, right? Let me flip back here real quick. We can also see my subscriptions. So when I'm actually going to be asking the server, what am I going to ask it for? So here is, I don't care about that one. Active modules. So in NetWars games, we'll have groups of questions, those modules. So here is the subscription and publication. Request those additional modules. I can see with some of these, those additional parameters will be sent. In this case, there's no parameters. If I go down a little bit further, no params on that one, etc. I can keep clicking through. Now this sucks to do manually, doesn't it? It's a lot of clicking around in the JavaScript console, which is fine, but it'd be nice to kind of automate some of that, right? Right? Yeah, okay. We can also get some of the routes information. So we'll have, like, for example, we're in the game level 1. I can extract some of that if they're using Iron Router, which is one of the very common routing frameworks. Router.route. Router.routes. There's the various routes. There's a login route, so /login. So I know the various paths I can access within a web application that are going to be valid. I don't need dirbuster. I know exactly the paths that are going to be valid because I can extract this from Iron Router. That's handy, isn't it? I can find, for example, if I keep clicking around, I can find that there's a /admin interface. I can try to access that, see if authorization is done properly to access those pages. Am I encouraging you to attack? If you can find a hole, I will get you so many beers. So automation. Now I don't want to do this manually, right? Now, have any of you guys ever tried to write a Firefox web API? I forget the exact words. It is a miserable experience. Like, you have to build this thing, compile it, give it to JavaScript, give it to Firefox, have Firefox restart, and then test it, and then that doesn't work. Then you have to do this whole little weird choo-choo chain of sadness over and over and over again. It completely sucks. Instead, we can use Tamper Monkey. Now, these frameworks in the browsers try to prevent these extensions from interacting with page JavaScript. Now, I don't quite understand it because they can manipulate the DOM, but they can't access the page variables because that's insecure. I'm like, really? Rewriting my page isn't insecure, but somehow we've crossed the line accessing my JavaScript variables? Whatever. So somehow Tamper Monkey has done some weird dark magic so that from within Tamper Monkey, I can interact with the JavaScript variables in the page. Right? Otherwise, you're not allowed to do it with the typical web extensions. Firefox's web API allows you to, but it's a miserable, miserable experience to do any sort of development in that. Now, there's a Tamper Monkey, works for a bunch of them. If you're using IE or Edge, then I have sadness for you. So we're going to use the unsafe window here. Let me fire this up. So I'm going to turn Tamper Monkey on. And now I'm going to refresh this page. So up here in the top right, what we see is here are all the collections loaded within the. Oh, and there's one record. I've got levels. There's 5 records. I've got messages. There's 92 records. Meteor use. I have unique. Can't just add these no bases. I have we here Oh, look for ones where the data, you want to look for the one, the others, because that's additional, a little bit funny there, question a couple different ways, etc. We can also see the subscriptions. Now I was doing that command line ago. It was the subscription additional parameter the past was a 1. So maybe I can change this to some other value. Try to do some NoSQL, right? The templates, these are the pieces that are going to render content within the page. That's kind of interesting. The one that I really like is the routes. So our paths within the application, assuming the is being used back in, it's a very common routing framework within Meteor. So I can see here, like, there's /admin/messages. So maybe I can try to, I hope do this, right? We can see down here, prefixed with a colon, be sending route. So just brute force these paths, legitimate paths. Life a lot easier, a lot more efficient. So let me switch back here. Unsafe window. This is how I'm actually accessing the JavaScript variables, because again, the browsers try to protect you from doing anything unsafe. Like installing some random script that I wrote isn't a bad idea. Sorry guys, this is the wrong slide. Yeah, I got full of dad jokes. Yeah. So I've also written another tool called Meteor DuzeGhost. It's based on the to-dos to-dos application that update data. There's some vulnerabilities in here, so if I fire up my Taper Monkey is kind of a pain in the butt sometimes. Refresh, here we go. So for example, here's the various collections. So I see there's a settings collection. I see there's a couple of routes that we can try to access, login, register, a list, specifying ID here. I can try to access the lists. And what we'll see is when we access these other pages, additional subscriptions might be accessed, and we'll see the delta highlighted here in yellow when the things change. So if I go to the login page, we see the login template is now loaded, and it blinks really quickly. Click on register. Register pops up. Let's create one real quick. So there's home. Here's my lists. As I click around, I can see the templates and the subscriptions show up. I've got a couple of SQL injections within here. I've got extra information you can extract with users. The passwords is extracted. All the details are available online in the which I have linked to right here. All right, cool. I'm trying to get finished with my 12:30 slot. Questions for both of you? Yes, sir. Yes. So there's two packages. So his question is, he's asking about one of the packages that is installed by default. When you set up a Meteor application, by default, it's going to add two packages. It's going to add Insecure and Auto-Publish. What those do is it sends all of the data all of the time to the client. And the reason is it helps a developer quickly prototype. They don't have to push the data. They can just quickly prototype, set it up. Now what you're supposed to do, the package is called Insecure. So guess what you should do with that one? Remove it, right? Fortunately, I haven't in the real world seen anybody that still has the Insecure still installed. They push too much data, but whatever. So ideally, you remove those, the auto-publish, the Insecure, and then you push the content yourself and make sure that you properly filter and only send the data and the records and the fields that are needed for the application, not too much. Cool. Other questions? You guys want more pizza? Yes, sir. Are there other backend databases? But I don't remember off the top of my head. I can Google that and find out. The question was, are there other databases you can use in the backend? I think it supports any of the NoSQL stuff, but I know most of the integration is with Mongo. Yeah, I don't know the details on that. So he's asking, is mini Mongo that's used in the client is in RAM or on disk? I don't know off the top of my head. Are there any NoSQL scanning tools that are any good? Anybody know a decent one? I don't. For NoSQL? Yeah, they're miserable. Cool. All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming. Go get some more pizza.